Well, I hope that students in reading this chapter in this big handbook of public relations and strategic communication would really get a sense of the fun of speech writing, the variety that is involved in that discipline, if we can call it that, and also the challenge that's involved, that it's not just like any other writing. It's a kind of special kind of writing involving the ear as the way in which information is taken in rather than the eye. Almost writing in a slightly different kind of language. And I think good writers of any sort like the challenge of shifting into a different mode, and I think that's what this chapter is really about. I think the motivation was really an invitation to do it from Clark Haywood, who's my colleague at Northwestern University, and even after I left Northwestern, we stayed in touch, and he's been very interested in my work at George Washington University and asked if I would do this chapter, along with a lot of other people who I've come to know are pretty expert in their fields, a whole range of marketing and strategic communication communicators, and to be part of that group and to be in this big McGraw-Hill book, I thought would be exciting and an honor and fun, and also nice to take what I'd been teaching in the classroom and try to put it into a chapter form. So it was a invitation that I couldn't say no to. Wonderful question as to why there's more and more speech writing going on. I think there probably always was some, but they used to be called ghost writers, and they remained rather invisible. Now people who do this tend to speak up and identify themselves as the writer, even if somebody else delivered the speech. The number of speeches that are being given in a variety of settings, I think, is multiplying. People are getting busier. People who give speeches are in demand, but in a lot of demand. And they can't use the same speech over and over as much because the internet and other sources tend to use up material. And I also think audiences are more demanding. Audiences are accustomed now to the best of Madison Avenue and of Hollywood, and they expect public officials and leaders of all sorts to step up their game. So I think there's a need for good professional speech writing, good competent speech writing that's been increasing. The essay I did in this textbook grows out of the class. And in the class, I would say more than half the time is spent actually giving and writing speeches. In fact, in one assignment, the students write a speech for some other student to give so that they can hear what their words actually sound like to an audience. The practice of actually doing it, I think, teaches you a lot of things you can't learn abstractly. Things about yourself, your own capacities, what you're good at, how long it takes you, what tendencies you have that you want to try to put in check, adding too many adverbs or verbs, or just having all your sentences be the same length, and tendencies things you do well that you want to do more of, putting a concept into a narrative story form, for example, or telling a joke, or having some marvelous visual illustration of a point. So I think you learn that about yourself as you write, and everybody's style and everybody's approach will in the end be different, and finding your own best approach is something I think you do as you practice. There's always this pressure for shorter speeches, though it isn't always evident. I think there's also a public demand for authenticity, for feeling that the speaker really is saying what he or she thinks, for a sense of some hardcore of conviction. And the fact that the speech is written by somebody else works against that. Even if it's beautifully delivered, there's a little sense that a manuscript speech might not be as authentic. On the other hand, the demands for manuscripts increase because of the complexity of topics, the shortage of time, the fact that another person can prepare a manuscript in a careful, eloquent, detailed way. Experts can look at it ahead of time. It can be circulated afterward. Even in this international world, a manuscript someone can take a lot of time to translate it into another language, which is often important. And you can't really do that if you're speaking extemporaneously. The translation won't be as eloquent. So I think the trend will be one of trying to combine these two things. And maybe the example that I've seen most recently of that being well done was Bill Clinton's speech at the Democratic National Convention, where he had one can find this online, he had a text, it's all in black in the script. A lot of it was crossed out in blue, as I remember, which were all the things he dropped as he spoke. And then there was a lot of language added in red, which was everything he added as he spoke, spontaneously. Things like, now listen to this point's really important. And the combination was, in a way, I thought the best of both. A lot of carefully prepared material, along with spontaneous, warm, what seemed to be spur of the moment material, which humanized the speech and kind of let you look inside Clinton, even as you heard the message that had been carefully worked out in the prepared portion. So that might be one trend, the kind of amalgamated speech. The ear is a much handicapped way of taking in information. I think we read and see things, whether we're watching a movie or play or just people at work, or we read things in ways that are advantageous to us. Number one, we remember what we see. There's a phrase, things go in one ear and out the other, but they don't go in one eye and out the other. We tend to remember what we see much better. So that's one part of it. A second thing is that the ear is rather slow in picking up information. It connects differently in the brain. So in the same amount of time, you can read thousands of words, and in that same time, you'll only get a fraction of that if you're listening to somebody speak. So you can't pack as much into a speech. One famous writer about speech writing says that you have to use more words for each thought, more words per square thought, he says. And that means almost padded outlines, repetitions, illustrations, in order to give the material time to soak in. Otherwise, it just does wash away quickly. The ear really also is less in control of the rate at which information comes at you. The ear can't go into rewind or fast forward. If you daydream, as everybody does in a speech, and you wake up, it's too bad. You've lost that part of the speech. You can't look back to see what somebody really meant. You can't pause to ponder a point. You can't look ahead to see how much longer the speech is going to be. You're really at the control of the speaker. And the result is that the communication has to be clearer, better organized, more repetitive, I think, in order to handle the wandering mind, in order to give the reader who missed it the first time a chance to catch up, in order to make the people who are listening comfortable in the speech setting, realizing that we've now 2/3 of the way through, or the speaker is making 4 points and he's already on his second, or whatever it may be, or he's telling this narrative story which is building to a climax, and I feel I know where I am, and I can locate myself in the larger pattern of the speech. So in all those ways, I think writing for the ear is a different challenge from writing for the eye. Sometimes I tell students it's like almost learning a different language, which isn't quite true. But it will, the language will be livelier, more compelling, perhaps with more cadence, more rhythm, more music to it. Because one thing the ear does tend to remember is poetry and music. And so speeches, I think, can adapt to the ear by using more musical qualities, by also having more visual components, by being well structured and organized, and by trying to have more words for each idea. The worst thing is to try to write jokes, which the speaker can't tell well or doesn't get a laugh for. But that's maybe the hardest thing to do, is to try to put humor into a speech. But a lot of speechwriters now, I think, take on an added obligation, which is that of trying to get the speech not just written, but delivered well. So they rehearse with speakers more. I think that's one new dimension. They're more involved, what we call the strategic speechwriter, in choosing the place, the audience, the time and topic, of planning ahead, of saying, well, if we want to explain our company's environmental program, there's a big convention of the Sierra Club coming up in January, and Salt Lake City would be a great place to do this, and let's talk about this aspect of our program, and then you start in drafting the the text, putting all of those elements together in advance so that the speech really serves a strategic purpose and isn't just limited to a momentary tactical circumstance.